The Ruhr Valley was the beating heart of Hitler's war machine. From its vast steel mills poured the armor plates that covered panzer divisions. Its armament plants stamped out weapons by the thousands, from rifles to artillery pieces, feeding the Wehrmacht's insatiable appetite for war. Synthetic fuel plants turned coal into liquid gold, ensuring tanks and aircraft never ran dry. By 1943, the Ruhr had become not only Germany's industrial powerhouse, but also a symbol of Nazi resilience, fortified, defiant, and seemingly untouchable. The Germans knew the Allies wanted to break it, and so they built their defenses accordingly. Along the river valleys and factory complexes, flak towers rose like black sentinels, bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Radar stations dotted the countryside, able to detect incoming formations long before they reached their targets. Hardened bunkers, reinforced with thick concrete, shielded vital machinery. To the men of the Luftwaffe stationed there, it felt like a fortress no bomber force could penetrate. Crews bragged that British and American planes might scratch the surface, but the Ruhr would always bounce back. Factories could be repaired. Supply lines could be rerouted. The Ruhr, they said, was invincible. That confidence was not unfounded. Earlier Allied raids had paid a heavy price. In 1942 and 1943, the Royal Air Force sent bomber streams over the Ruhr night after night, determined to hammer the industrial base into rubble. The cost was staggering. Whole squadrons of Lancasters and Halifaxes failed to return, torn apart by flak bursts or intercepted by prowling night fighters. Searchlights cut through the darkness like blades, trapping lumbering bombers in cones of light before the guns opened up. For the crews, missions over the Ruhr became known grimly as the Kammhuber Line, a gauntlet of fire and steel. Even when bombs did fall, the results often disappointed. Precision was difficult from high altitude, especially in the smoke-filled skies of the industrial basin. Bombs scattered wide, hitting worker housing or open ground rather than the vital steel furnaces and chemical plants. German repair crews worked tirelessly, clearing rubble, patching roofs, and setting machinery back in motion. Within weeks, sometimes days, production surged again. It seemed as if the Ruhr shrugged off destruction like a boxer shaking off punches, battered but unbroken. In London, military planners wrestled with the dilemma. If the Ruhr could not be silenced, Germany's war machine would keep grinding forward. The Battle of Britain had proven the toughness of the Royal Air Force, but air supremacy meant little if the Reich's factories churned out endless weapons. Something more than brute force was needed, something that could strike at the very foundations of German industry. It was here that a quiet, bespectacled engineer named Barnes Wallis entered the story. Wallis was no general or politician. He was an inventor, a man who thought about war in terms of physics, mathematics, and structural weakness. He had already designed the famous bouncing bomb used by the dam-busters in 1943, proving that unorthodox ideas could deliver spectacular results. But Wallis had another concept in his mind, one even bolder than skipping bombs across water to shatter dams. What if, he asked, a bomb didn't need to hit its target directly? What if destruction could be achieved not by brute force from above, but by shockwaves beneath the ground? Wallis envisioned a weapon so heavy, so aerodynamic, that it would fall almost supersonically from great height, piercing deep into the earth before detonating. The explosion underground would act like an earthquake, shaking buildings off their foundations, collapsing tunnels, and making even reinforced bunkers crumble. It sounded like science fiction. A single bomb, delivered with precision, could do what thousands of conventional bombs had failed to achieve. Many dismissed his idea as impractical. How could such a massive weapon be built, let alone carried by aircraft? But Wallis persisted. He sketched designs, ran calculations, and argued his case with quiet determination. The Ruhr, with its sprawling industrial fortresses and stubborn defenses, seemed the perfect proving ground. If Wallis's vision could be turned into reality, then even the mightiest factories of Hitler's empire might tremble. For the Luftwaffe crews who still mocked Allied bombing raids, a new kind of nightmare was already taking shape in the mind of a British engineer. The age of the earthquake bomb was about to begin. Barnes Wallis was a man obsessed with solving problems others thought impossible. To him, brute force was never the answer, precision was. He believed that even the strongest fortress could be undone if you struck at its foundations. His revolutionary concept was not to rely on sheer weight of explosives showered from the sky, but to use the laws of physics themselves as a weapon. He envisioned bombs that would burrow deep into the ground or crash through reinforced concrete before detonating, unleashing a seismic shockwave that rippled outward like an earthquake. Instead of tearing through walls with direct hits, the explosion would undermine the very ground beneath them, toppling structures that conventional bombs could never touch. From this vision came the weapon that would be known as the Tallboy. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Shaped with the grace of a bullet, the Tallboy was over 20 feet long and weighed 12,000 pounds. Its casing was streamlined, designed to fall clean and straight, with stabilizing fins at the tail to prevent tumbling. Released from high altitude, the bomb could reach near supersonic speed as it plummeted toward its target, striking with such force that it buried itself deep into earth or concrete before the delayed fuse triggered. When it detonated underground, the resulting shockwave could shatter foundations, collapse tunnels, and make massive structures crumble as if the earth itself had turned against them. But such a weapon demanded a special kind of delivery. At the time, no Allied bomber could carry something so heavy, except one, the Avro Lancaster. The Lancaster had already earned its place as the backbone of Britain's night bombing campaign, capable of hauling massive payloads across Europe. Yet even the Lancaster had to be modified to accept the Tallboy. Engineers removed bomb bay doors to accommodate the bomb's enormous size. Crews were trained to fly with a steadiness and precision that went beyond ordinary bombing runs, because with a weapon like this, accuracy mattered more than sheer numbers. A Tallboy could not simply be dropped into a wide cityscape. It had to be aimed at the exact spot where its earthquake effect would be most devastating. This need for accuracy was one of Wallis's boldest demands. He argued against the doctrine of saturation bombing that had dominated the air war until then. Instead of sending hundreds of aircraft to blanket an area with explosives, he insisted that a handful of Lancasters, guided by skilled navigators and bomb aimers, could accomplish more with a few Tallboys than entire fleets could achieve with conventional bombs. At first, many commanders resisted the idea. But Wallis's persistence, coupled with Britain's growing desperation to cripple German industry, forced them to listen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the front, rumors began to spread. German intelligence intercepted whispers about a British super bomb, a weapon of unprecedented size and destructive power. Reports trickled in about strange modifications to RAF bombers and experiments with oversized munitions. But within Luftwaffe command circles, such stories were largely dismissed. Analysts argued that no aircraft could possibly carry a bomb of such weight without crippling its performance. Others sneered at the notion of an earthquake weapon, calling it British propaganda designed to intimidate. After all, German industry had survived everything the Allies had thrown at it thus far. The Ruhr still burned bright with the glow of furnaces, and factories still churned out weapons by the thousands. The idea that a single bomb could do what entire bomber fleets had failed to accomplish was, to them, laughable. Yet in secret hangars and workshops across England, the impossible was becoming reality. By the spring of 1944, Tallboys were rolling off production lines. Crews trained relentlessly, practicing precision drops on test ranges, learning how to compensate for wind drift, altitude, and the bomb's unusual flight profile. For the men of the RAF's elite squadrons, carrying the Tallboy was more than just another mission. It was a responsibility, a chance to wield a weapon that could change the very course of the air war. The Ruhr Valley, still arrogant in its defenses, had no idea what was coming. The Luftwaffe crews who mocked Allied raids had not yet seen a bomb that made the ground itself tremble. Soon they would. The age of the Tallboy was about to begin, and the myth of German invulnerability would face its greatest test. By mid-1944, the time had come to put Barnes-Wallis's vision to the ultimate test. The Ruhr, that sprawling fortress of steel and fire, was chosen as the proving ground. Bomber Command's orders were simple, but carried a weight unlike any before. Cripple the very factories and strongholds the Luftwaffe boasted could never be destroyed. In briefing rooms across England, crews leaned forward as target maps were laid out, red circles marking the hardened sites the Germans believed invulnerable. This would not be another night of saturation bombing over city blocks. This was precision, this was surgical, and for the first time, the men in those rooms carried a weapon designed to bring down fortresses, not just buildings. The atmosphere was tense. Veterans of past Ruhr missions knew what awaited them. Dense belts of anti-aircraft fire, searchlights stabbing the night sky, and the lethal dance of German night fighters. They called it Happy Valley, a bitter joke for one of the most dangerous assignments in the air war, but there was a new sense of determination now. They were not flying into the flak with ordinary bombs. They carried Tallboys, and if these weapons worked as promised, they would do in a single strike what months of relentless bombing had failed to achieve. Engines roared to life as the Avro Lancasters taxied onto runways under cover of dusk. Each one bore the colossal shape of a Tallboy in its bomb bay, its tail fins gleaming faintly under the fading light. The ground crews saluted as the aircraft thundered down the runways and lifted into the night. The mission was underway. Over the North Sea and into occupied Europe, the squadrons flew tight formations. Pilots gripped their controls, every nerve braced for the storm ahead. As they neared the Ruhr, the sky lit up in a terrifying display. Flak guns opened fire, black bursts peppering the darkness with lethal blossoms of smoke and steel. Searchlights swept the sky, latching onto the bombers like fingers of accusation. And then came the night fighters, Messerschmitts and Junkers streaking in with guns blazing, determined to break the formation before it could reach its targets. But the Lancasters pressed on. Crews fought to keep steady as shells exploded around them. The intercoms crackled with warnings, evasive calls, and the flat, calm voices of navigators guiding their aircraft to the aiming points. The bomb aimers crouched at their positions, peering through crosshairs, waiting for the moment when the Ruhr's sprawling industrial heart filled their sights. Then came the release. With a deep metallic shudder, the Tallboys dropped from their bays. Unlike the fiery cascades of conventional bombs, these fell in eerie silence, long and graceful arcs slicing through the night. They gathered speed faster and faster until they struck the earth with the force of meteors. What followed was unlike anything the Luftwaffe crews had ever witnessed. There were no immediate fireballs ripping the sky, no showers of sparks scattering across rooftops. Instead, the ground convulsed. The shockwaves burst beneath the surface, tearing foundations apart. Entire factories, rooted in concrete, shuddered and split. Smokestacks toppled like matchsticks. Assembly lines collapsed inward as walls caved, burying machinery under tons of rubble. German anti-aircraft crews stood stunned at their posts. They had endured countless bombing raids before, repairing, rebuilding, and mocking the RAF's inability to deal lasting blows. But this was different. The very earth seemed to betray them, rumbling and breaking as if some hidden force had reached up from below. Bunkers they had trusted, bunkers reinforced with steel and concrete, cracked and crumbled under the unseen fury. In Essen, vital facilities of the Krupp armament works, the pride of Germany's war industry, buckled as Tallboys tore at their foundations. Precision strikes that once seemed impossible were now reality. Where hundreds of bombers had left little more than scorched roofs, a handful of Lancasters armed with Tallboys reduced buildings to ruin. The effect was not just physical but psychological. German workers fled in panic, convinced the Allies had found some secret weapon capable of tearing the world itself apart. Back in the sky, the RAF crews could see the results even from altitude. Plumes of dust and debris rose not in fiery explosions, but in great gray clouds as if the land itself had erupted. Over the intercoms came clipped confirmations: targets destroyed, impacts successful. For men who had lost friends on futile Ruhr missions, the sight was both awe-inspiring and grimly satisfying. Luftwaffe commanders rushed to assess the damage and were horrified at what they found. Machines buried under rubble, production lines shattered beyond quick repair, and once impregnable strongholds cracked open like shells. They had scoffed at the idea of a British super bomb. Now they stood among the ruins of factories that had withstood every previous attack, humbled by a weapon that made a mockery of their defenses. As the surviving Lancasters turned for home, battered but triumphant, a new truth hung over the Ruhr. The fortress had been breached. The Luftwaffe crews who once laughed at Allied futility now whispered about the bombs that made the ground explode. For the first time, the myth of German invulnerability lay broken in the rubble, and the men of Bomber Command knew they had finally struck at the heart of Hitler's war machine. The raids on the Ruhr changed everything. In the days and weeks that followed, German production figures told a story that even propaganda could not hide. Steel output slumped as furnaces lay in ruins and transport links were severed. Assembly lines once churning out tanks and artillery stood silent, their machinery buried under collapsed roofs. Rail tunnels that carried supplies into the heart of Germany were blocked, their entrances sealed by landslides triggered by underground detonations. For the first time, the Ruhr, the industrial lifeblood of the Reich, was gasping. It was no longer a fortress feeding the Wehrmacht at will, but a crippled giant struggling to recover. Morale within the factories and among the defenders cracked as quickly as the walls around them. Workers who had once shown defiance now whispered fearfully of the new weapon, the one that made the ground itself betray them. Luftwaffe gunners who had boasted that no bomber could ever truly harm the Ruhr began to lose their confidence. In taverns and barracks, They spoke in hushed tones about the missions where no firestorm lit the skies, yet entire complexes fell into rubble by dawn. They called them the bombs that made the earth explode. The myth of invulnerability, carefully built by the Nazi regime, had been shattered not by endless waves of conventional raids, but by a handful of precision strikes that proved nothing in Hitler's Germany was beyond reach. For the British, the success of the Tallboy marked a turning point in strategic bombing. Barnes-Wallis's theory had not only worked, it had redefined what was possible in the air war. The earthquake bomb became the weapon of choice for the most heavily protected targets. Soon, Tallboys were dropping on V weapon sites in northern France, where vast concrete bunkers designed to launch Hitler's secret rockets were shaken into useless ruins. In occupied ports, U-boat pens with walls meters thick, structures once thought indestructible, were cracked and rendered inoperable. And in perhaps its most famous mission, the Tallboy found a floating fortress, the battleship Tirpitz. Hiding in the fjords of Norway, the pride of the German Navy had long been a menace to Allied convoys. Conventional bombs had failed to sink her. But when Tallboys struck, they tore through her armored decks, sending the giant battleship capsizing into the icy water. The legacy of the Tallboy was more than just destruction, it was psychological warfare. It taught the world that no wall was thick enough, no bunker deep enough, and no fortress truly safe. Even the Germans, masters of engineering and fortification, were forced to accept that their strongest defenses could be undone by a single, precisely delivered weapon. For the men of Bomber Command, the missions over the Ruhr became a symbol of vindication. After years of flying through fire only to see their targets rebuilt, they had finally dealt blows that could not be patched up overnight. The Ruhr never fully recovered to its former capacity. And every Lancaster that returned home from those missions carried not just the scars of battle, but the knowledge that they had helped shift the balance of the war. Imagine the closing scene, high above the smoke and wreckage, a lone Lancaster turns for home. Below, the shattered factories of the Ruhr lie broken, their chimneys collapsed, their machines silent. Searchlights still claw at the night sky, but the bomber has already slipped beyond their reach. Against the darkness, its silhouette glides quietly, fading into the horizon. It is more than just a machine. It is a symbol of a new truth, that no target, however proud or protected, was safe any longer in Hitler's Germany. If you were a Luftwaffe crewman in the Ruhr, would you have still believed your defenses could withstand anything? Or would the Tallboy's earthquake power have shaken your faith? And tell me, do you think the Tallboy was the most game-changing bomb of World War II, or does another weapon hold that title?